Steven Universe is fundamentally not a show about comforting yourself. There's a lot of joyful, uplifting, and hopeful messages in the show, and it's a very pleasant thing that way. But I've always considered it more challenging in how it portrays its protagonist than comforting. This has been true since the beginning. It's no secret that Amethyst was once selfish and insecure, Pearl was toxic, judgmental, and self-sacrificing, and Garnet was aloof, authoritative, and unwilling to open up, and none of them are always right. There's no wise, kind-hearted elder who can tell your insecure protagonist that they're right and they did nothing wrong, and it's just the world that's mean. Everyone has genuine vices, and there's no voice of pure reason. There are subtler moments where characters are, at least in the eyes of other characters, wrong, but for each of them, there are also bigger, crucial moments where the narrative thoroughly debunks the idea of them as moral voice of reason, or someone whose own mistakes doesn't impact others, and challenges you to not rely on them to tell you what's right. For Garnet, this moment comes quite early in Mirror Gem. For Amethyst, it's maximum capacity. Then Pearl in Sworn to the Sword. And for each of them, this is reinforced on multiple occasions throughout the show as they struggle to grow and open up to one another. And for Steven, that moment is right now. There have been many occasions where the show has made it clear that while Steven is the protagonist, flawed term, I know, and it's ultimately his story, he's not always right. In fact, he's a character who is often defined by his lack of knowledge, his perceived inability to fix things, and how it frustrates him that people don't open up to him. He's just as susceptible to putting characters on pedestals as the audience itself. And his failures can do lasting psychological damage when he defines himself by his ability to help people. Steven has also never been a fully reliable narrator who gets everything right about other people. He is colored by his own perceptions, intuitions, and biases between people, and this has always been there. For evidence of this, look no further than how his perception of his mom has colored his actions. She was a berserk button trope for Steven early on. Attacking her felt so personal that he would antagonize people who did so, even when they, in reality, had legitimate grievances. This is a key difference to the baggage she holds for him now. He's aware of the difference between himself and his mother, and that she was not perfect, i.e., he doesn't demonize you for saying something bad about her. He takes the L and he emphasizes as best as he can, and he knows that she can hurt as well as she helped, but the pain of association doesn't necessarily go away overnight. It doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to have a rational, calm reaction, but that's not the same thing as demonization. That being said, prescribing all of Steven's current pain to his mom, and not to the collective forces of the upbringing that he had, is just silly. Don't do that. Not because she's not a part of it, but because it's way, way more than that. And it takes responsibility away from every other force in Steven's life, including himself. Steven Universe abhors simplistic scapegoats as the end-all, be-all reason you're unhappy. I also think it minimizes how Steven's angst serves as an analogy for the fear and confusion a substantial portion of Gemkind faces for what it means to exist without a purpose. So, we know what happened to the purpose of the other diamonds, or why Jasper feels aimless in this brave new world, but for a quick refresher, what happened to Steven's purpose? Steven, from a young age, felt the need to carry the burdens of others. He's perceptive enough to know that those burdens are there, and particularly in the case of his guardians, the other crystal gems, he believes that solving their problems is what he needs to do to get the attention and validation he craves. This has been pretty obvious since Season 1. He loves the gems, but he's not confident that he's good enough for them. That's why the moment his development physically stagnates correlates with the age he started living with them. Even how he looks is very much related to how he feels. He also starts out feeling both physically and emotionally powerless, which is why he slowly but surely grabs onto unhealthy ways of exerting some form of power. First by defining himself by his ability to fix others' problems, then upon realizing that the gems have kept things from him because he's a child, he starts hiding things from them as well. What he hides are feelings he believes are inconvenient to share because they don't fit his purpose, which is to help others, not himself, and in return gain their love. In short, he develops a hero complex that isn't just because of his mom, though she's a part of it, but because of his entire upbringing. Noticing the trauma and suffering of those around him and feeling like the only way to have an emotionally open and available guardians, though they try to help him and be there for him, is for them to completely lay themselves bare and let him fix their problems. Rose never gives him a destiny to fulfill. He wants to have a destiny to fulfill because he's desperate to fix everything he notices as undeniably broken. That's why the knowledge that, no, Rose didn't have this great plan for him to fulfill, she just wanted him to live a normal human life, is always somewhat bittersweet. No, it's not good to define yourself solely by one selfless purpose, but what else is he supposed to do? What else is there for him? I think the version of Steven who comes the closest to dealing with this trauma in the quote-unquote main show is the Steven of Season 4, who, fresh from his failures to connect with people at the end of Season 3, is made to admit that failing to do the thing he started to define himself by has torn his mental health apart. He's able to slowly but surely recover by reconnecting to his network of gem and humans connections and give himself these smaller victories to help people. This helps him help himself temporarily, and it's a great setup to ultimately freeing himself from this purpose by unequivocally being himself in Season 5. But while it's great that he's not his mom and he is truly himself, what does he do now? Now that society is changing at such a wide scale as to have eclipsed his purpose, and most of the people in his life don't need him to fix them anymore, that puts him in the same situation as every other homeworld gem who is struggling to adjust. You have this selfless purpose that was bigger than yourself, gave you clear meaning in a chaotic world. Now what? So, as in seasons past, he tries to find things to fix. The baby steps of homeworld gems to integrate into free Earth society isn't totally reinventing their personalities and giving them transitionary jobs that help them decide whether they want to go outside their comfort zone or not, and they aren't quick enough for you? Well, they must not have your enlightened anti-hierarchy mindset, so let's give them all new jobs without asking what they think. They're not mature enough to think for themselves. And if Lars and Sadie, who you spent much of your childhood meddling with to cope, drift apart, that must be because Lars isn't honest enough with his feelings like you are, not because people can genuinely grow and change without you orchestrating it. And this reinforces Steven's flaws. Part of a hero complex is the undeniable downside that you give yourself a lot of agency over other people. You start believing that you're always acting in their best interest, and because they're not as emotionally mature or enlightened as you know better for them than they do. And nobody feels the need to fix everything more than those who have been told their entire lives, whether by internal reactions or outside circumstances, that that's what they're here to do. Be damned what the person they're trying to help themselves feel or want. Which is why Steven still really has the quintessential mindset of a diamond. He didn't need to be Rose for that. He just needed to be who he's become, by everyone depending on him as much as he's dependent on himself. He just needed to be needed. What Steven projected with the garden and prickly pear was the most white diamond-like thing he's done so far, but it wasn't unexpected. Creating these static versions of everyone who are literally tethered to the ground, he has full control over their growth, or lack thereof, and they live in his space where he can always be a part of everything. Yeah, none of that surprises me. He doesn't want them to have lives that exist outside of him because he doesn't know who he is without them. Obviously, he's not hurting people, at least not yet, but he's literally creating an artificial space where everyone are trapped and no one can change, condescendingly telling Lars that he can't leave, quipping to the cactus about how he knows exactly how each of the crystal gems would react because he's been their therapist for years, including what he perceives as their flaws, the ways they bother him, and he doesn't want to deal with it because he just wants to protect the status quo where he's needed. My point is, none of this is new or shocking to me. Oh, Steven distracts himself with overworking himself because he doesn't want to face who he is or what he wants. He's been doing that for years. If you paid attention, you know that he hasn't worn his cheeseburger backpack since around season 3 either. That's not new. The only thing that's new is the fandom revealing how much they flanderized Steven in their heads as this happy-go-lucky kid with no issues of his own, who only exists to cheer you up, never challenge you or have needs of his own that would ever inconvenience you. I think people's reactions to Steven right now serves as a great litmus test as to who has actually been paying attention to his character up until now, versus who has only stereotyped him as this stock soft boy character. Steven's persistently had issues overstepping people's boundaries, quote-unquote, for their own good. This is easy to spot in episodes like The New Lars and Sadie's Song, where honestly what they want is less important than what he thinks they need. He struggles to separate what he should concern himself with versus what he shouldn't, feeling like people are his responsibility to deal with, struggling to acknowledge his own desires and feelings, and what it means to consider the feelings of others when making selfless decisions, which is a very Diamond thing to do. He doesn't want to deal with how terrifying the prospect of finding a purpose is without having someone to fight or help. AKA, he's much like White Diamond, and he's much like Jasper, and he's much like a lot of the selflessly minded homeworld gems. And everything he tells Jasper, for instance, is stuff he could also tell himself. And that's been the case for a long time. And people stereotyping him as this one-note happy kid is something I found a bit upsetting, because it kind of makes it sound like you would prefer if he only existed for other people's sakes, without ever being faced with how treating a friend like that might give them psychological scars. I'm sorry folks have been sleeping on him for so long, because he's always been a very interesting character. He can't just open up once and then he's fine forever. He needs to continually work on finding his place in the world and facing his own issues. And as someone with a hero complex, he feels like, as a very special person, he is responsible for everything and everyone except himself. He has to make everything better for them, and lingering on your own feelings too long is weakness or selfish. And all of this is why I think corruption is the perfect route for him. As I said before Future started airing, while me and a handful of other people were just kicking corrupted Steven theory around for fun, Steven knows that he's not his mom, he knows that he's got his friends, but how much does he tie his identity to his ability to help others? How much does it feel like he's gotta always be ready to face everything, and that he can't take time to work through how he really feels? This, I think, is a very necessary point in his story. The season 5 finale was a celebration of him being himself, but not necessarily dealing with what that's going to mean from now on, what it truly is to exist without his old purpose. And the conclusion he came to in the movie wasn't fully happy either. It was basically, I'll keep doing this forever, but it's okay, I accept it. Also, I've got friends here. It was someone who's still clinging to that bittersweet sense of purpose. This is hard, this is tiring, but it's what I got. Maybe that's okay because it's better than having nothing. Maybe it's fine that I can't stop or rest. Maybe that's more comforting than asking myself what I would even do when faced with longer stretches of time where the only person I can try to help is myself. Who am I when I am alone? Am I so desperate for purpose that I control others? Am I so afraid of my own feelings that I'm burying them so deep that they're threatening, sooner or later, any day now, to explode? The core of a corrupted Steven theory, to me, will never be darkness for the sake of darkness. It will always be the culmination of two forces which are equally important. One, that Steven needs not just help, but catharsis. The continuous trauma endured over generations by everyone he's surrounded with and who he willingly takes on and tries to help has instilled him with such a need for purpose and usefulness that he's practically a homeworld gem. He can't just be reminded that he has friends. He needs to release these feelings that he's burrowed somehow. And if he can't find a healthy way to do that, eventually there's gonna be an unhealthy one, and that's gonna serve as a consequence for everyone who's allowed themselves to prioritize their own feelings and never ask him how he's doing. Two, that Steven is not perfect. Like we mentioned at the beginning, he's a flawed being, just like everyone else around him. And just like them, he's not immune to being shaped by his world in both positive and negative ways. Much like their trauma, many of the flaws of others are reflected in him, because they reflect flaws in how he was raised, and in how they were raised, and who they've become, and who he's become. He was not born controlling or aching to help even those who do not want it, or deeply critical of everyone's flaws, while refusing to acknowledge his own self, but that is the natural end result of who he's been molded into. Being surrounded by guilt leads to being obsessed with being helpful. It naturally builds into the mantle of the hero whose struggle is always, always for others. And when that succeeds, that's great for them. You helped people. But when it fails, or is unwanted, or when it's finally complete, it can lead to not just a judgmental person who's looking for flaws to fix, but an authoritarian one. A Steven who thinks he knows best because he must know best. He's supposed to be better than this. He's supposed to be the good person who makes people good. And that's the core reason he has to justify his own existence. That's the purpose, to make everything better. Just like what White Diamond wanted. And to be the better person is, of course, a double-edged sword, both as a selfless existence and as a reason to exist. Examining your own feelings and flaws is selfish to him here, as long as there are others to help, be damned if they want it or not. And of course, if you go far down enough that road, you can justify anything because it's for a good cause. Just look at Jasper. She refused help for the same reasons. She existed for reasons beyond herself, beyond her own salvation. She existed for a purpose. These ends aren't just outranking the means, they're outranking working on the self in any meaningful way. But corruption is never the final end result. If they're gonna go with this, I believe what they're truly going for is to have Steven go through the same kind of redemption that every traumatized and flawed character in this show is needed. Community, love, and understanding. The knowledge that your own follies are for reasons bigger than yourself, and you don't have to bear this alone. Steven Universe is first and foremost a show that deals with hope. It sees the value of a societal lens where we don't spend all our time just punishing individuals. The reasons they're like this are far bigger than themselves, and it's better for everyone to help them because they're gonna keep influencing others just as they've been influenced by others. All of which is to say, the outcome of Steven corrupting will and should be Steven healing. The same healing he's always tried to give everyone else.